Over 1.1 million souls, men, women, children, were extinguished in Auschwitz, a name that echoes through history as a symbol of humanity's darkest hour. This was no ordinary place. It was a sprawling labyrinth of suffering where the air itself carried the weight of despair, and every brick whispered tales of unimaginable cruelty. But within this vast nightmare, there were corners even more sinister, where the Nazis' brutality reached its zenith. Welcome to the heart of terror, the death blocks of Auschwitz, Block 10, Block 11 and beyond. These were not mere buildings, they were chambers of agony, where bodies were broken, spirits were shattered, and the worst of human nature was laid bare. Today we journey into these horrific spaces where we'll uncover the stories of the prisoners who endured them, the monsters who orchestrated their torment, and the flickers of defiance that burned even in the deepest despair. This is not just history. It's a warning, a testament, and a call to never forget. Auschwitz wasn't just one camp, it was a sprawling network of misery, located in the occupied Polish town of Oświęcim, renamed Auschwitz by the Nazis. Established in 1940, it grew into a monstrous complex. Auschwitz I, the administrative and torture hub, Auschwitz II-Birkenau, the extermination factory, and Auschwitz III Monowitz, a slave labor camp. But it's within the barbed wire of Auschwitz I that we find the death blocks, buildings that became synonymous with cruelty, experimentation and execution. These blocks weren't just structures, they were instruments of annihilation, designed to break bodies and spirits. Block 10, the laboratory of nightmares. Block 10 stands as a chilling testament to the Nazis' perversion of medicine. This unassuming brick building, nestled within the heart of Auschwitz I, was no ordinary barrack. It was a laboratory of nightmares, where Nazi doctors, men who swore oaths to heal, conducted experiments that defied every shred of human decency. Their goal? To advance the Nazi ideology of racial purity through pseudoscientific cruelty, targeting the most vulnerable. Women, men and even children. The prisoners selected for Block 10 were often handpicked from the camp's population, chosen for their youth, health or specific traits that caught the eye of their tormentors. Women in particular bore the brunt of these experiments, though men and children weren't spared. Inside the overcrowded rooms of Block 10, conditions were abysmal. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and fear. Sanitation was non-existent. Food was scarce, and medical care was a cruel irony. Prisoners lived in constant dread, never knowing when their name or number would be called for the next procedure. At the forefront of Block 10's horrors was Dr. Karl Klauberg, a man obsessed with perfecting mass sterilization. Klauberg's mission was to devise a method to prevent undesirable populations, primarily Jews, Roma and others deemed inferior by the Nazis, from reproducing. His experiments were as brutal as they were methodical. Women were subjected to agonizing injections of caustic substances into their reproductive organs, designed to block their fallopian tubes. The pain was excruciating, often leading to severe infections, internal bleeding and lifelong infertility. Many didn't survive the procedures. Those who did carried physical and emotional scars that never healed. Klauberg's work was cold and calculated. He kept meticulous records, documenting each procedure with clinical precision as if the women were mere specimens. One survivor, a young woman named Eva, later recounted the terror of hearing her number called, the searing pain of the injections, and the humiliation of being treated as less than human. "They took everything from us," she said. "Our dignity, our future, our hope." In a letter dated June 7, 1943, Dr. Karl Klauberg informed Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler that he had developed a method for mass sterilization of women at Auschwitz concentration camp. He reported that his non-surgical technique, involving the injection of chemical irritants into the reproductive organs, was nearly perfected and could potentially allow one doctor, with the assistance of 10 personnel, to sterilize up to 1,000 women per day. Klauberg stated that the method caused severe inflammation and occlusion of the fallopian tubes, rendering the women infertile. He also noted that the experiments, conducted primarily on Jewish and Romani women, were progressing successfully, with the potential for widespread application. Additionally, Klauberg had earlier, on May 30th, 1942, requested permission from Himmler to transition from animal to human subjects for his sterilization experiments, a request that was discussed and approved in a meeting at Hitler's headquarters in July 1942, as documented in secret minutes signed by Karl Brandt, Himmler's aide. But Klauberg wasn't alone in Block 10. Dr. Horst Schumann, another so-called physician, pursued his own grotesque sterilization program, Schumann's weapon of choice: X-rays. He exposed prisoners' reproductive organs to high doses of radiation, aiming to develop a quick, covert method to sterilize entire populations. The results were devastating: burns, ulcers, and infections that left prisoners in agony. Schumann's experiments were not only inhumane but also futile, driven by a twisted ideology rather than any scientific merit. And then there was Dr. Josef Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death. Mengele's presence in Block 10 was a spectre of terror. His obsession with twins, heredity, and eye color led to some of the most sadistic experiments in Auschwitz. Twins were his favorite subjects, seen as perfect test cases for unlocking the secrets of Aryan supremacy. He would inject one twin with chemicals or pathogens, observing how both reacted. He performed unnecessary surgeries, often without anesthesia, removing organs or limbs to compare the twins' responses. In his quest to change eye color, Mengele injected dyes into prisoners' eyes, causing blinding pain and permanent damage. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Mengele's work was his methodical cruelty. When he was done with a set of twins, he often ordered them killed with a lethal injection, so he could dissect their bodies and compare them in death. His laboratory was a chamber of horrors where screams echoed and hope was extinguished. Survivors described Mengele as a paradox, charming one moment, ordering executions the next. His unpredictable nature only heightened the terror. The prisoners in Block 10 were dehumanized, referred to by numbers rather than names. Their suffering was recorded in chilling detail, with no regard for the lives behind the data. These records, discovered after the war, reveal the cold efficiency of the experiments, a stark reminder of the Nazis' ability to strip away humanity while cloaking their actions in the guise of science. Block 10 was a place where the line between human and monster blurred. The doctors who worked there weren't just following orders. They were architects of suffering, driven by a warped vision of racial purity. For the prisoners, it was a living hell, where every day brought new torments. But Block 10 was only one piece of Auschwitz's grim puzzle. Just steps away stood Block 11, a place so terrifying it was known simply as the Death Block. Block 11. The Death Block. If Block 10 was a laboratory of pain, Block 11 was a fortress of despair. Known as the Death Block, this building was where the SS unleashed their most brutal punishments and executions. Surrounded by electrified barbed wire and guarded by ruthless SS personnel, Block 11 was a place where hope went to die. Its very name struck fear into the hearts of prisoners, a symbol of the Nazis' limitless cruelty. Inside Block 11, the air was thick with the stench of blood, sweat, and fear. The building housed a series of cells and rooms, each designed for a specific kind of torment. The SS's political department, responsible for interrogations and punishments, operated here with chilling efficiency. Prisoners were brought to Block 11 for a variety of reasons: suspected resistance, escape attempts, or simply to serve as examples to others. Once inside, they faced a gauntlet of torture designed to break their spirits and extract confessions. Interrogations in Block 11 were savage. SS officers used whips, batons, and heavy objects to beat prisoners until they bled or lost consciousness. Some were subjected to electric shocks or had their fingernails ripped out. The goal wasn't just to gather information, but to instill terror throughout the camp. One survivor, a Polish political prisoner named Jan, described the screams that echoed through the block at night, a haunting chorus that never ceased. But the horrors of Block 11 didn't end with interrogations. The basement cells were among the most notorious. These tiny, windowless chambers were designed for maximum suffering. Some were so small that prisoners could only stand, unable to sit or lie down. The standing cells were particularly cruel. Measuring just a few square feet, they forced prisoners to remain upright for days, leading to excruciating muscle cramps and collapse. Others were locked in starvation cells, where they were left without food or water until they perished. The air in these cells was stale, suffocating, and filled with the stench of death. Perhaps the most infamous feature of Block 11 was the Black Wall, located in the courtyard between Blocks 10 and 11. Here, prisoners sentenced to death were lined up and shot by firing squads. The wall was stained with blood, a grim monument to the thousands who met their end there. After each execution, the bodies were carted away to the crematorium, their ashes scattered to erase any trace of the crime. For the prisoners of Auschwitz, the Black Wall was a constant reminder of their precarious existence, a place where life could end with a single bullet. Block 11 wasn't just about individual punishment. It was a tool of collective terror. If a prisoner attempted to escape, the SS would select a group from their barrack to face punishment in Block 11. These prisoners were forced to stand in the courtyard for hours, sometimes days, without food or water, enduring beatings or grueling tasks until they collapsed. The message was clear. Resistance would be met with overwhelming cruelty. The death block was a microcosm of the Nazis' ideology, a place where power was absolute and humanity was irrelevant. Prisoners sent to Block 11 knew their chances of survival were slim. Yet even in this abyss, there were glimmers of defiance. Some prisoners scratched messages into the walls of their cells, desperate to leave a trace of their existence. Others whispered words of encouragement to their fellow inmates, clinging to the faint hope of survival. These small acts of resistance remind us that, even in the face of unimaginable horror, the human spirit could endure. Block 12, the Quarantine Block. Just beyond the death block lay Block 12, known as the Quarantine Block, a place of isolation, uncertainty, and despair. When prisoners arrived at Auschwitz, many were funneled into this block to prevent the spread of disease. But in truth, Block 12 was less about protecting health and more about breaking new arrivals, preparing them for the horrors of the camp. The conditions in Block 12 were deplorable. New prisoners, already weakened from long journeys in cramped, filthy train cars, were packed into small rooms with little ventilation. Food was scarce, often just a thin broth or a crust of bread. Sanitation was a distant dream. There were few toilets and water was rationed to a trickle. Lice, fleas and rats thrived in the squalor, spreading diseases like typhus and dysentery. The block was cold, damp, and exposed to the elements, with no protection from rain or snow. The SS used Block 12 as a crucible for their selection process. Upon arrival, prisoners underwent medical checks to determine their fitness for work. Those deemed too weak, sick, or old were marked for death, sent to the gas chambers, or left to perish in the block. The healthy were subjected to harsh discipline, forced to stand for hours during roll calls, even if they could barely stand. Beatings were common, administered for the slightest infractions. The SS guards ruled with an iron fist, using fear to maintain control. The quarantine period varied. Some prisoners spent days in Block 12, others weeks. The uncertainty was its own form of torture. Prisoners had no idea what awaited them: forced labor, further torment, or the gas chambers. This psychological warfare was deliberate, designed to strip away hope and reduce prisoners to a state of submission. For many, Block 12 was their first taste of Auschwitz's cruelty, a grim introduction to the nightmare that lay ahead. Block 12 was more than a holding area. It was a place where the Nazis began the process of dehumanization. By isolating prisoners, starving them, and subjecting them to relentless brutality, the SS ensured that new arrivals were broken before they even entered the main camp. Yet even in this bleak environment, prisoners found ways to resist. Some shared their meager rations, others whispered stories of their lives before the camp, clinging to memories of a world beyond the barbed wire. Block 24, a twisted facade of relief. In the midst of Auschwitz's horrors, Block 24 stands out as a bizarre anomaly, a place that offered a twisted semblance of relief, but only for a select few. This block housed a library, a music hall, and later a brothel, each serving as a tool of Nazi manipulation. These facilities were not acts of kindness, but calculated moves to maintain control and reward compliance. The library in Block 24 was a far cry from any traditional haven of knowledge. Its collection was small, tightly controlled by the SS, who decided which books were permitted. Only privileged prisoners, those who had earned favor through hard work or collaboration, were allowed access. The books offered a fleeting escape, but they were also a reminder of the Nazis' absolute power, as every page was subject to their approval. Next to the library was the music hall, where the camp's orchestra performed. Composed of prisoners who were musicians before their internment, the orchestra was forced to play during roll calls and for SS events. The music was a haunting contrast to the camp's brutality, a melody of beauty in a place of death. For the prisoners, playing was both a privilege and a curse, as it spared them from harder labor, but forced them to entertain their oppressors. In 1943, the second floor of Block 24 became home to something even more sinister, a brothel known as the Puff. Reserved for privileged prisoners who earned tokens for their labor, the brothel was a grotesque reward system. Visits were strictly regulated, with a bell signaling the end of each 15-minute session. SS guards monitored the rooms through peepholes, ensuring compliance. The women forced into the brothel were prisoners themselves, stripped of agency and treated as objects. Their suffering was just another layer of the camp's cruelty, hidden behind the facade of a reward. Block 24 was a stark reminder of the Nazis' ability to twist even the smallest comforts into tools of control. The library, music hall and brothel were not acts of mercy, but mechanisms to manipulate prisoners, rewarding compliance while reinforcing their subjugation. For the women in the brothel, the musicians in the orchestra, and the readers in the library, these spaces were a cruel mockery of freedom, a reminder that even moments of respite came at a cost. Auschwitz II-Birkenau, the factory of death. While Auschwitz I's death blocks were chambers of individual torment, Auschwitz II-Birkenau was the beating heart of the Nazis' extermination machine. Located just a few kilometers from Auschwitz I, Birkenau was a sprawling complex designed for one purpose: mass murder. Its 4 massive gas chambers and crematoria operated with industrial efficiency, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands, primarily Jews, in the Nazis' pursuit of the final solution. Birkenau was divided into sectors, each with its own grim purpose. The B1 sector, initially a quarantine area, later housed prisoners deemed fit for work. The conditions here were unimaginable. Wooden barracks, originally built as horse stables, were overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and plagued by vermin. In the summer, the heat was suffocating. In the winter, the cold was deadly. Food was scarce, and disease ran rampant, with typhus and typhoid claiming countless lives. The B1 sector was also a site of Mengele's and Schumann's experiments, with Blocks 30 and others dedicated to their horrific work. Infant twins and their mothers were housed in Block 22, while older twins were kept in Block 1. Few survived these experiments, their bodies and spirits broken by the Nazis' pseudoscience. The B2 sector was the reception area, where new arrivals faced the infamous selection process. As trains pulled into Birkenau, prisoners were herded off, separated by gender, and subjected to snap judgments by SS officers. A gesture to the left meant death in the gas chambers. A gesture to the right meant forced labor. Families were torn apart, never to see each other again. The elderly, children, and the sick were often sent to their deaths within hours, told they were heading for showers to maintain calm. The Theresienstadt family camp in Sector B2B was a cruel deception. Established in 1943, it allowed Jewish families from the Theresienstadt ghetto to stay together, wear civilian clothes, and write letters home. Letters forced to claim they were safe. This was a propaganda stunt to mislead the world about the camp's true nature. In reality, the conditions were as brutal as anywhere else in Birkenau, and by July 1944 the camp was liquidated, its prisoners sent to the gas chambers. The Roma family camp in Sector B2E was another tragedy. Romani prisoners brought from Germany and Austria lived in overcrowded barracks plagued by disease. Typhoid and pneuma, a disfiguring illness, ravaged the population, particularly children. Despite their suffering, the Roma resisted, maintaining their culture through music and performances. In May 1944, they staged a brief uprising, arming themselves with makeshift weapons. The SS retreated temporarily, but by August, most of the Roma were gassed, their defiance crushed. At the heart of Birkenau's horror were the gas chambers. Initially, 2 converted farmhouses, the Little Red House and Little White House, served as killing centers. Prisoners were told they were going for showers, only to be locked inside and gassed with Zyklon B, a pesticide-turned weapon of mass murder. As the number of victims grew, the Nazis built 4 larger gas chambers, each paired with a crematorium. These chambers could kill thousands at a time, their efficiency chilling in its precision. The Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoria, bore witness to the unimaginable. They removed bodies, extracted gold teeth, and burned corpses in ovens or open pits. Their work was done under the constant threat of death, and most were eventually killed to silence their testimony. Yet, some Sonderkommando members risked everything to document the atrocities, burying their accounts in the campgrounds. These writings, later discovered, provide a haunting record of Birkenau's horrors. In October 1944, the Sonderkommando staged a desperate uprising, using smuggled explosives to destroy Crematorium 4. Though the revolt was quickly suppressed and most rebels were killed, it was a rare act of defiance against the Nazi machine. The destroyed crematorium was never rebuilt, a small victory in the face of overwhelming horror. Sector B3, the Mexico of Birkenau. As the number of prisoners arriving at Birkenau soared, the Nazis faced a new problem: overcrowding. In 1943, they began constructing Sector B3, intended to house 60,000 prisoners. But construction lagged, and by 1944, only a fraction of the planned barracks were complete. When thousands of Hungarian Jewish women arrived in May 1944, they were crammed into this unfinished sector, nicknamed Mexico, for the blankets prisoners wrapped around themselves, resembling ponchos. The conditions in Mexico were the worst in Birkenau. Barracks were overcrowded, with up to 1,000 women in spaces meant for 300. Many slept on bare concrete floors without beds or straw. There were no kitchens, washrooms, or toilets, just 1 barrel of water per day for thousands. Hunger was relentless, leading to fights over scraps of food. Disease spread unchecked, and the weak, known as Muselmänner, were left to waste away, their bodies reduced to skin and bones. Mexico was a place of desperation, where survival was a daily battle. A camp physician described the chaos after food distribution, with prisoners suffering broken bones and bloodied heads in the scramble for sustenance. The sector was closed in October 1944, its prisoners sent to other camps like Gross Rosen. But for those who endured Mexico, the scars of starvation and despair lingered. Auschwitz III Monowitz, the slave labor camp. Beyond the death blocks and gas chambers, Auschwitz III Monowitz was a different kind of hell, a camp built to fuel the Nazi war machine through slave labor. Established in 1942 to support the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant, Monowitz housed over 10,000 prisoners in brutal conditions. They worked grueling shifts, beaten and starved, with an average lifespan of just 3 to 4 months. The factory was a lifeline for the Nazis, but a death sentence for prisoners. Those too weak to work were sent back to Birkenau's gas chambers. Allied bombings in 1944 damaged the factory, but also killed prisoners, caught in the crossfire of war. When the camp was evacuated in January 1945, the fit were marched to other camps, while the sick were left behind, liberated by the Soviets days later. The end of Auschwitz, liberation and legacy. As the Red Army closed in on Auschwitz in 1944, the Nazis scrambled to erase their crimes. Gas chambers were dismantled, records burned, and prisoners marched westward in brutal death marches. On January 27, 1945, Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz, finding 7,000 survivors, walking skeletons, and evidence of unimaginable horror. 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 women's coats, and 7.7 tons of human hair. The liberation was a moment of hope, but the scars of Auschwitz endure. The death blocks, Block 10, Block 11 and beyond, stand as monuments to the victims' suffering and resilience, the stories of survivors, the accounts of the Sonderkommando, and the records left behind ensure that the world never forgets the atrocities committed here. Auschwitz is more than a place. It's a warning. Its death blocks are a reminder of what happens when hatred and indifference prevail. By sharing these stories, we honor the millions who perished and the survivors who carried their pain into the future. Let us never forget, and let us never allow such horrors to happen again.